What's going on with Bernard in Season 2 of Westworld? Could he secretly be a host-human hybrid? There are actually quite a lot of clues that he might be. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. This video is brought to you with the support of my Patreon community. Please do check out the link to my Patreon page if you're interested in supporting Deep Geek or joining up for some exclusive audio content. And do consider subscribing here if you enjoyed the video. And there will obviously be spoilers here if you're not up to speed with Westworld. There is a lot going on with Bernard in Season 2 of Westworld. He's clearly being affected by all the blows to the head he has been getting. He's glitching, time-slipping, and so on. And there's clearly something very suspicious about the scene where he wakes up on the beach 2 weeks later. We'll look at that in another video, but is there something else going on? Something even more fundamental about who he is? Could he possibly be a host-human hybrid, like William was trying to do with James Delos? The starting point for this theory is the reason for Bernard's first visit to the secret research lab we saw in episode 4. We saw him enter there earlier in his memories or time slippage. Incidentally, time slippage is one of the symptoms of his entering his death subroutine, which we saw happen in episode 1. It means that he sometimes experiences two different times at once, flicking between them. It seems to be triggered by being in the same place as where something traumatic happened previously, hence him asking questions like, "Is this now?" Because he's not sure which of the moments in time he is seeing is now. And when he was at the research facility with Elsie, he kept jumping back to when he was previously there on his own. Ford sent him that time. His mission was to collect a control unit for a human-host hybrid. It is what Delos and William were using to try to turn James Delos into a host human. It looks like a normal control unit or brain for the hosts, but with much, much more complex coding. Bernard then got the clone hosts to kill the human technicians who were witnesses to him taking it, and then for them to kill themselves. The action focused on the violence, but the more significant point here is the revelation that Ford wanted a control unit for a human-host hybrid. The only reasonable conclusion is that this was so that he could create a human-host hybrid. But who? There are many possibilities, but when we remember that this is Ford who was wanting it, and he only wanted one, it must be for a human very important to him. Perhaps it was for himself. Perhaps the reason why he was so relaxed about Dolores killing him was because he knew that he had already created an immortality for himself in a new body. But the other option that I have to say I prefer, for the reasons I'll set out in a moment, is that Ford was wanting to bring back his old partner Arnold, whose likeness we know of as Bernard. In other words, map Arnold's memories and thought patterns into the host that already looks like him, sounds like him, and behaves like him. Now, we have to say at this point that it's true that the Delos Research Lab hadn't yet mastered the task of mapping a human into a host, but they very nearly had. Their last effort survived for over a month before the host body rejected the match, and William himself said that he thought that they were very close to complete success. But more fundamentally, this is Ford's and Arnold's technology. We would expect Ford to be ahead of them in this, as he was ahead of them in so many ways. So it's fair to say that Ford could create a human-host hybrid, and given that he went out of his way to get that control unit, it's also fair to say that he very probably did create one in the last few days or hours before his death and the massacre at the end of Season 1. This conclusion is backed up by a whole raft of foreshadowing in Season 1 and Season 2. Let's start with the fact that Ford and Arnold were both creating host versions of real people right from the early days. They might not have been true hybrids, but they were very accurate copies. The child Ford host we see repeatedly, and his family, were made by Arnold for Ford as gifts, and Ford, in return, made Bernard an exact copy of Arnold. Making host versions of actual humans was not an afterthought for them, it was how they started. And then we have Ford's cryptic comment made to Bernard about Lazarus. Evolution forged the entirety of sentient life on this planet using only one tool, the mistake. But of course, we've managed to slip evolution's leash now, haven't we? We can cure any disease, keep even the weakest of us alive, and, one fine day, perhaps we shall even resurrect the dead. Call forth Lazarus from his cave. In other words, one day he aims to bring a human back from the dead. But if Ford was wanting to bring someone back, why Arnold? Why not himself? I think the answer lies in the fact that Ford holds himself responsible for what happened to Arnold. Arnold was clearly troubled after the death of his son, but his effective suicide by Dolores was as a direct result of Ford not agreeing with him about the host's gaining self-awareness, a position that Ford soon realized Arnold was completely right about. We heard Ford say in Season 1 that what he was trying to do was put right his mistakes from 35 years ago. Surely this was his greatest mistake. He got something wrong, and it led to the death of his only friend and partner. How could he possibly put right the fact that Arnold died? By bringing him back to life. Let's not forget that everyone thought that Bernard was a human. He was the only host in the entire park that Ford knew no one would open up to look at. So, if he had the means and the motive to do it, are there any other clues that this was actually what he did? Clues that there is more to Bernard than just a normal host? Yes, there are. Lots. First, and this is perhaps a coincidence, but the only other host we have seen suffer from the same shaky hands problem as Bernard in Season 2 is James Delos. And this is explained as a side effect of the human mind struggling to map itself across to the host body. What if this is what is happening to Bernard? Then we have Ford's slightly awkward farewell to Bernard at the end of Season 1. He gives him an odd handshake, looks him in the eye and says, "It is time to say goodbye, old friend. Good luck." Remember, Bernard is the host that Ford has recently made do all manner of terrible things, including shoot himself in the head. Bernard is disposable. Calling him old friend and wishing him luck is what you might expect him to say to Arnold, not Bernard. Because Arnold was his only real friend. And sure enough, he gives him the only possession of Arnold's he perhaps still has, the original maze puzzle. He gives it back to Arnold. This seems to me like a moment where Ford is talking to Arnold, not Bernard. Which leads immediately to a moment just before the massacre that can easily be overlooked. In the middle of Ford's speech, just as it is becoming apparent that he has recreated the moment when Dolores shot Arnold, Bernard mutters, "These violent delights have violent ends." He is accessing Arnold's memories of what happened before and linking it to what is happening now. That wasn't Bernard's memory, he wasn't there. And it wasn't part of the Bernard backstory that he had been given. That was Arnold remembering. And then we have Dolores and how she reacts to Bernard. In that Season 1 finale, we also saw Bernard and Dolores meet. Ford says that he had tried to keep them apart because they always had an odd effect on each other. This is understandable for Dolores. She had buried memories of Arnold, but it wouldn't make any sense for Bernard. If Bernard was just a physical copy of Arnold without any of his memories, why would Bernard react oddly to Dolores if he'd never met her? And then in season 2, when Dolores and Bernard meet again, she says that it's been some time since they talked, just the two of them. But she has never talked like that with Bernard, just Arnold. And she says, "You don't know who you are, do you?" to him. She clearly knows that he is Bernard, not Arnold, but she also clearly thinks that he should remember being Arnold. Dolores clearly thinks that Bernard is a human-host hybrid. And then we also see the first glaring inconsistency of the Season 2 premiere. When Bernard is glitching and having some sort of mental breakdown early on, we see him time-slipping through memories and experiences. One of these memories is of Arnold visiting the real world with Dolores. That wasn't Bernard the host, it was Arnold the human. How could Bernard possibly be reliving that memory unless he has Arnold's experiences and mind mapped onto his? In fact, the more you look at Bernard in Season 2, the more you can see that he can only be rationally explained if Bernard is Arnold. Combined with the foreshadowing, Ford's clear desire to correct his mistake 35 years ago, and his desire to bring someone back from the grave, Bernard, being a human-host hybrid, is actually the most likely explanation for what is going on. What if Ford recreated Arnold as best he could, giving him a similar backstory and job working with Ford himself to shape him as a person, but he needed something more to completely map Arnold's mind into him? What if he saw what William was trying to do to bring back James Delos and waited for them to throw money and time and resources at it? And then, when they had nearly perfected the technology, he swooped in, made a couple of tweaks and installed it into Bernard. What if the thing that was necessary for a human-host hybrid to work was suffering? Ford says that this was Arnold's greatest insight. James Delos didn't get any suffering locked in his airtight lab, but Bernard, Ford tells him that he must suffer some more when he says farewell to him. What if this suffering is exactly what he needs to become the first true human-host hybrid? Perhaps this is where Westworld is heading. This isn't a battle between humans and hosts, it's the creation of a completely new species that is part of both. The imagery we've seen in Season 2, in the new title sequence and the religious imagery, is of new birth, new life, new beginnings. Perhaps Bernard, Arnold, is that new start. But what do you think? Do you agree? Or do you think that Ford had some other purpose in mind for that control unit? Let me know in the comments below. I'm covering all of Westworld Season 2, with episode breakdowns and explanations, theory videos and pre-show live streams every Sunday. Please subscribe and click on the bell icon to make sure your notifications are switched on if you want to see more of my content. As always, I'd like to thank my patrons. Please click on the link to my Patreon page if you'd like to support this channel or get access to some more exclusive patron-only content. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.